Hi friends, Heidi. I'm back here with a video film review of Undine, directed by Christian Petzold. The film has done a bit of a tour and a couple of festival circuits and is now available on demand on major platforms. If you are in Toronto and Canada, you can stream it through the TIFF.net digital platform as well. So I'm here to talk about the film because it is a film that came my way by chance. I hadn't heard much about the film during its festival circuit, which sometimes it happens. There's a lot of messages going back and forth in terms of the films that are premiering, but the trailer caught my attention. The filmmaker is also one that is known in the festival circuits with other films like Transit. And in Undine, we also see the same actors from Transit in sort of a new element. So the reason I'm speaking about Undine today is because the trailer caught my attention. It looks beautifully quite stunning, I guess is the word that I would choose, and because the story kind of attracted my attention as well. So just a brief synopsis about the film. Undine is played by Paula Beer. She is a historian and museum tour guide specializing in urban development in Berlin. She meets Christoph, played by Franz Rogowski, sort of as by chance after her boyfriend Johannes just dumped her that same morning. Christoph is an industrial diver, and he's somebody who's also very curious about architecture, and he came to one of the tours that Undine was offering that day. So he proposes that they go for a coffee. They go to the cafe across the street where she was dumped by Johannes, and something happens there. You'll see it in the trailer. They kind of stumble upon each other, and they inadvertently break the little aquarium that's at the cafe. So with that sort of accident, Christoph kind of saves her because, they both fall down, and he thought she was hurt, and sort of they make this connection. So that is sort of the premise of how the two meet. They are our protagonists in the film, but the film itself is based on that myth of the female of the a mermaid or a nymph known as Undine, and the director Christian Petzold has discussed the film in some Q&As for different screenings, and he basically talks about how he was very curious about the myth, but he also loves fairy tales. So he saw this as an opportunity to write the script for these sort of star-crossed lovers, if you will. He talks about how he wanted to write the film from the perspective of Undine, where she is now more in control of what she wants and is no longer the object of desire of the man, because in the original myth, Undine, the nymph, falls in love with a person on land, a man, and she is sort of the object of desire. She receives that love, and she has no control of what happens. And he thought it would be an interesting way of kind of writing the story from the point of view of Undine herself. And in this point, she is sort of more of an architect of what happens. Part of the myth is that if Undine's husband or partner kind of leaves her for another person or remarries, something happened, he's fated to die, and in a way she needs to return to the water where she comes from. And he uses sort of this myth to sort of embedded in the story set in current times Berlin in a very interesting way, actually. And I'm a fan of fairy tales as well, and that's part of the reason why the trailer kind of had certain elements that made me question whether is she imagining this person, like, is this really a true story, or is this a straight up drama? And it isn't. And I like that I was pleasantly surprised by the way that it was unfolded in the film. The story, I mean. And I also liked that there's a lot of beautiful cinematography work in the film by Hans Fromm, who's a frequent collaborator of Christian Petzold, the filmmaker. The two characters played by Paula Beer, as Undine, and Christoph by Franz Rogalski are so great to watch on screen. As I mentioned earlier, they have worked together in another film called Transit. And in one of the interviews, Petzold talks about how there's a loose connection between this film and Transit, but it's more about, I guess, the two characters. They're not quite directly linked up by story, but just more about the characters and things that happen to the characters that in a way you could sort of say that they're connected. But ultimately, he is writing this film as part of an Elements trilogy, this one being water. Water plays a huge element in this film since Undine comes from the water. So I don't want to give too much away about what happens in the film. As I mentioned, they're star-crossed lovers, so we know that that could lead to a little bit of a bittersweet kind of unfolding of the story of Undine and Christoph. But I urge you to watch it if you're curious about fairy tales or romantic stories with a little bit of a bittersweet undertone. Again, as I mentioned, the cinematography is quite stunning, and I also was noticing that they're Petzold talk about he could have filmed some of these underwater scenes using green screen, but he chose to build that environment so that the actors could be underwater and developing that I guess relationship to that myth of the nymph, the underwater nymph, and it just so kind of places you in this sort of time and space, while you also notice that they still live in current times Berlin. So there's a lot to like about the film. It is not a film that I would recommend for somebody who likes straight up stories told from beginning to end, or if you need to have an ending that is 100% clear. It isn't this. If you're a fan of films that are sort of on on the fairy tale kind of vibes, or you're looking for just a story that is a little bit different from the norm, I'd recommend Undine. I also like the pacing of the film. It is not quite 90 minutes long, and it unfolds quite beautifully. The score is minimal. I quite enjoyed a lot of different aspects of this film for different reasons, as I mentioned. And I also like the sort of little elements that are peppered through the film. There's a lot of symbolism. There is the little statue of the diver in the aquarium that breaks in the beginning of the film, and it's kind of connected to both Undine and Christoph being a diver himself. So there's a lot of little attention to details there. The models that are used in the museum where Undine works of Berlin, and the Berlin that used to be, and sort of the different kind of iterations of the architecture of the city as well. There's a lot of great tidbits there. And I think it's also about the visuals. There's a certain color palette in the film that sort of connects us to this element of water or being underwater. And is this also airy feel of being in a fairy tale, but it's still in contemporary times. So there's a lot of little nuggets that are kind of the reason why I really enjoyed the film. As I mentioned, if you are not too sure about it, give it a chance. I recommend second viewings. If you're curious, there's certain things that you might catch on second viewings. So try to find it. It's on demand on all mainstream platforms. And the name is Undine, Undine. The director is Christoph Petzold.